at 45 minutes to an hour,
Right. Okay. Right.
depending on
So,
how my
right,
messages come through.
okay, we have 45 minutes. So, folks, instead of me going through this, this is a little bit of a, again, it's something that's quite, it's about task and energy. And so, again, here, that in comparing these positions, so in Model G terms, the brake position and the monitor position. And within the actual theory of Model G, the monitor position is high in information and low in energy. But my contention, my key contention is that the more information you have for a task, the easier it is to do, the less energy you need to expend. And therefore the task requires less energy. So that's that part of the equation. How much energy, how much mental energy does the task demand of a particular person? And that same person can find the same task more demanding, say, when they're first learning something and it's hard for them to learn. So say you've got somebody learning a TE thing and they're learning the procedure and how to work a particular piece of software. And it requires them to concentrate a lot and to think about where everything is and to apply their thinking. 5 years later, the same piece of software, they can whiz through it. And so that task is requiring less energy, less mental effort, because they have higher information. Now, I know I'm running together the idea of know-how with information, but I think that's correct in the context of, because Victor's model does talk about energy levels in relation to tasks and task efficiency. Yes, Andre, you may chime in.
I think there might have been some translation error with, the so-called energy versus information. Um, I believe that the control function and the launcher function are high information. What that actually means is they're quite sensitive, the most sensitive functions there are. So any information that's out there in the environment is what those two functions will pick up. And these two functions are the most conscious to the person. They're very aware of what's going on in those functions. Now, in contrast, when we talk about functions which are full of energy and low information, those are the lead function and the demonstrative function. That means we just perform those functions without really realizing we're insensitive to their performance.
Okay, I can see how that is true for certain functions. I can see in certain examples where you could see, say, you've got an SE DOM and you see them do something, and it's like, how do you do that? And it's like, I don't know. And I can see that with certain, say, maybe with an any DOM, when it's like they'll just like see the connections, and it's like, well, isn't it obvious? But I think with certain functions, and I would argue with, say, TI, I would argue that TI is very aware of how it works because TI likes to think about thinking. And so I would say that the INTP is very aware of how TI works because it likes to think about its thinking all the while. And I think the same with FI is very aware of its own feelings and it sort of lives there. So I think it depends on the function. Over, but not out.
Um, to some extent, I guess. Like let's just say, um, let's take an LSI, the Model G inspector, which is different in KBN systems. whatever that is. I haven't looked at those in a while, but they lead with L, function L, which may not necessarily to be equal to TI. So function L, let me take a look at the definition. Function L deals with matters. It's a structural logic. So unlike, function L always has some kind of explanation. Doesn't like contradictions. It's manifest, at least in Model G, that's how it's defined. It's manifest as a set of algorithmic instructions, ordering, sorting. So if I understand this correctly, this may actually look like TE in MBTI and KBN systems. So that's why these systems are different. They don't have one-to-one correspondences at all. And not even just within the introverted types. I would even say the images that Model G creates for extroverted types as well are different than images from MBTI KBN systems. And if you want, we can do like another event when we go deep a little bit. I've been taking classes with Victor. But so going back to the original point, when L is the lead function in Inspector LSI, they cannot help themselves but to try and impose order and structure and things that they interact with. Right? They don't do it necessarily consciously. It's just the default mode of operation. If I see something, like for example, if all they know to do is how to use a hammer, and everything becomes a nail in whatever they comes across. So that's kind of like subconscious use of your default mode. They always want to structure everything. And so one of the issues that LSIs get into is they try to put rules of deductive logic onto human relationships, FI or R. And so they actually have to train their role-playing function in order to start getting along with people, not to show coldness when an understanding ear is required, for example. And so they have to be trained to do this because by default and subconsciously, they want to apply rules of logic.
Right. Yeah. And so this issue comes down to, like, as in here, because Victor even calls LSI the inspector. And I would say at the core type level, if you read a description of LSI, you would think this should be ISTP, but it reads like Kersey ISTJ. And so TI in Socionics has got like these sort of like two influences of like how TINX uses it, LII, and then how LSI uses it. Anyway, so we're getting a little bit off the beaten track because today we're going to be doing.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the difference between when the function is being used consciously,
right,
or subconsciously. So the lead function is used subconsciously. It's your default mode. You're not aware that you're using it. You just use it. You never think about it. So it has a low energy, low information. It has lots of energy. And if you compare it to control function, it's very sensitive to what's going on with this function environment. You just don't do it. At least that's how it's in Model G.
Right. Okay.
I'll jump in and say that what I've seen of lead function, like what Ben, you were describing of TI in INTP or in TINX, and other types, like for mine, which would be lead would be TE, there's not high use, low awareness of it until it's highlighted. Like you noted INTPs being very aware of the way that they're thinking and categorizing and functioning within their thinking, but that's once they're aware of it. And I think that's maybe within the type community, because outside of the type community, INTPs that I know do not realize and are quite absent-minded to the way that they use TI. It's not until I might find the layman's terms to convey it to them that a light bulb goes off and there's a level of awareness. And I think it's the same way with my type, with my TE, that I will TE, and I like use a little like hammer axe like this to represent it. And I will do that without thinking about it and without awareness. So it's a high energy. Like it's not even a high energy though. It takes me no effort. So I will do it without even any consideration. And it's not until it's brought to my awareness through either the typology system or someone else bringing it to my attention that I realize I'm doing it. And I see that commonly with the first function.
I think what we can get is, well, for a start, my experience might be slightly different because I'm 6 fixated. And so the 6 is self-conscious and like has got a lot of doubt, and I get a bit meta about it. So what I might say is, because I can see both of your points of view, is that I would say that it's almost like, say, you know how you've got a thing called like groupthink, and you've got like when people think inside the bubble. So it might be a kind of a bubble kind of thing where from a certain point of view, they have a lot of information about the function within the bubble of the function. So for example, with your TE, you will know a lot of like TE things within that, but maybe not that within the bigger picture of how your TE affects the bigger picture and other things. So it might be a bit of that where it's inside knowledge, but not outside knowledge of the function. Because I've got to think that someone who spends most of their time in their lead function, that going along with the idea of Jung and van der Hoop, that is the most differentiated function, and the function as the largest area in the default field of consciousness. And I do think that certain functions, as I mentioned before, are more conscious than others, but there is that part of it where someone can be very aware of a certain aspect of their function, but not that function from, say, another point of view. So you might have somebody, you might have an FE DOM that is, and this goes to what you were saying earlier on before we went on air, that you might have an FE DOM that's very aware of, say, the feeling states of other people, but not necessarily of itself, because it's concentrating so much on other people. I think you brought that point up. And so there is that thing where, so let's do the analogy of someone in sports, where you've got to think that you can have an example where someone is very, very good at a skill. And you've got to think from a certain point of view, they know a lot of nuances about the task that they're performing. So say they are a batter in baseball. There's a lot of things that they have information about. But also, if you were to ask them certain things about how they did it, they might not know. So do you see what I mean? It's like this. It's almost like, in a certain respect, you can have a lot of information for the function within the bubble, but not maybe outside of the bubble of the function. So that's my sort of compromise position.
Mm-hmm. I think that's true for like natural skills that come naturally with little effort. People don't realize exactly what it is or how they got there because it developed like seamlessly, like it's just magically a thing that they can do.
Yeah, so maybe they're conscious of the results more than the process of the function. So yeah, and certainly I think that can be the case with intuition. Anyhow, so Yes, I mean that is a factor, the pausing and reflecting.
Yeah, I actually wrote an article how people have less control over their lead function compared to their creative function. People cannot help themselves but perform their lead function. They never ever cannot not do it.
Yeah, I think that again, I would sort of phrase that as being in the bubble of. It's like someone will say about people will say about the Washington bubble in DC, and they might say there's things going to be inside the bubble that they know, and versus the people looking from the outside is saying that they're sort of like cut off. So maybe you can have a function that's cut off from the knowledge that would provide from other functions. And Dario talks about this in 8 Keys to Self-Leadership, about how function can be misused. And so maybe I would say about what Andrew is saying is that might be related to misuse and use of the function. But I can also see that, yes, at times it can be very natural. But part of me is still thinking that the dominant function is going to be the most differentiated. The level of self-awareness is probably going to vary by type. I do.
I think the level of awareness is going to change by self-awareness, if it's been brought to their attention or not.
Yeah, go on, Andrew.
Okay, so I want to make 2 points before I have to go. The first one regarding the level of awareness. According to Model G, we're least aware of our lead function, which is do it. But what we are aware of are 3 things: our launcher and control functions. Those are both very sensitive. So that's what probably is meant by having high information. We're very aware of what's going on along those 2 functions. We get triggered easily by them. Either we get triggered and we start complaining when the control gets triggered, or we get triggered by our launcher and then we start performing our lead function again. So it's kind of recycles the whole thing. And the third thing that we are keenly aware of is our accentuations. These accentuating functions, it can be anything in our stack that causes the most trouble to our existence. We are keenly aware of it. For example, I'm always late, right? So I'm my T function, or introverted intuition as defined in Model G, is what's causing me problem. So I buy lots of tabletop calendars. I make notes to make sure I'm never late, but I'm still late. So I'm keenly aware of that. So those are the 3 things which we're aware of, at least the way I understand it. And more related to this topic is about the control function. Can we actually act on it or not? Yes, we can. Only if we do a mirage or semi-dual shift. Right? So LSI has, they lead with the L function, which is the introverted thinking. And they can act on their TE if they shift into I.E. mode or ENTJ mode, I guess. So when they start thinking about the bottom line, investments, and that sort of thing, only then can they act on it. It's when they shift, when they perform a mirage or semi-duality shift. Okay, I have to go.
Okay, right. I'll convert for So LSI will shift to
See you, Andre.
Yep. See, Andre. Terrible effort. So yeah, I mean, okay. So this idea about sensitivity. Okay, so let's compare ESFJ and ESTP. So
wait, ENTP. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just this point that he made about the launcher, about the sensitivity of the launcher function. And before we get back onto it, So I will say that Kersey wrote, and I asked Dario about ESTP can read body language very well. So what we see at the whole type level, if we are comparing the FE use of ESFJ and ESTP. So I would say your focus determines your reality. The focus of ESFJ is more on FE than ESTP. I would say ESTP focuses on FE. Again, it's a tertiary function situationally, because a lot of women would complain about ESTP men being inconsiderate.
I can't speak to that, but just in group settings, ESFJs more aware of group dynamic and energy. ESTP, I would say, more aware of each individual person's affect display. Like, what are they?
Yeah,
what
in
are
the
they
moment.
portraying? Individuals in glimpses. Yes.
But part of the problem there is that the FE of ESTP is not being helped by FI. So what I mean by that is Jeff talked about his son, and his son Morgan was taught about typology from the age of 8. And he would say that his son could read someone's affect display, but not know why it changed. So that FI, whereas the FI of ESFJ, that's where we might be invisible, where they would be able to read more what's going on behind the facial expressions. And so that would bump up their FE related people skills, I would say, of ESFJ. It's just that part of me is like, your focus determines your reality, and a principle that Dario believes in and Kersey wrote about, preference leads to practice, practice leads to ability.
Yeah.
That I do see this thing of, you know, it's like in an organization, and I'll go back to my original point. You can have somebody in an organization where they know their stuff better than anybody else, but someone can always come in from the outside and say, you're not looking at this. So do you see what I mean? It's that kind of like metaphor of in the bubble, that the lead function may be being in its bubble, of it's aware of things that other people are not. So for instance, maybe you could get where an INTP knows more about its own system than anybody else, but someone outside of that can think you're not accounting for this factor. So that is how I sort of integrate what Andrew was saying about the function, that people can be unaware of their function with, I think what you see in reality is just the idea of somebody being in their bubble. Like you can have an ISTJ that's in their bubble and knows all their system completely, but they're not seeing the big picture. And I think
and that's, I don't know how much of that is type specific versus just awareness specific. And that comes from life experiences and other things of, you can get very, very, there's like the depth of a thing that you go down in versus like the breadth that you go out in. And what's your ability to go, and you can't go deep into everything. It's impossible. There's just a certain amount of capacity that any single person has. But what is your ability to go like out more top level into the breadth of something, if you picture a funnel, and then to come back down into your thing?
I would say that it relates to something that Dario's mentioned and Jung has mentioned it. It's basically, it's someone who's stuck in their lead function and they're not balancing it out with other functions.
Yeah, and that's the super down in, and I think that speaks to what Andre was talking about, where there's someone's doing it so much and probably in a very precise and admirable way for what it is. And there is a lot of value in getting that, like, and I'm making like a little tiny circle here that's like down at the bottom of the screen, because there's like, once you get down that far, there's very, very few people that are doing that function or that thing the way that you are. And there's a lot of value in that. But then all of a sudden there's like some perspective, like you're saying, that comes out of it that's like, wait, was this considered or that considered?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's value in both of those things. I think, though, the maximum value is in synchronizing that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like
the really, really finite, specific, super rich things versus the more broad and expanding across the top.
Yeah. It's like, it's like when you bring in the business consultant that can see things from the outside, and it going to, and just basically the person rounding out. So I would say that, but yeah, I mean, I'll stick to that metaphor of being inside the bubble of the main function, especially if you don't develop the other functions. So
yes, which can happen, I think, with any types. That's just a developmental thing. That's a life track thing. That's an experiences thing. I think Andre had a note on the side about information and experience being correlated. So
I would say that Dario has spoken to something like this. So something that is a feature of Model G, I think, can be explained by other things rather than to say, because I'm not prepared to accept that the tertiary function is more differentiated than the lead function.
What do you mean by differentiated?
Well, I interpret differentiation in Jung as like the most nuanced function is the lead function, and because it's the most new and it's where the person spends their most of their time, that it is the function that they are most aware of. But like I said, it's in the bubble of that function, and maybe there are certain assumptions within that function that are not questioned by other functions, especially in an opposing function, where say you've got someone who's completely within TE, but there might be things that it goes against FE considerations of, and I think that just, but something that Dario talked about in his book 8 Keys. Have you got 8 Keys, Kristen? I think you have.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, so for the audience, there's bits in there about where he talks about, that's it. There's a section for so folks, if you get this book, there's a section in every chapter on a function about possible misuses of the function. And I think that relates to so for example, this is about TE. Sometimes the use of extroverted thinking becomes rigid and dominating because of stress, or because it is used without skill and without other processes to balance it. And I think that's the key part, other processes to balance it. When this occurs, we may, and so it's again, some of these, I'll go through one of them, then Dario won't kill me. People have to imagine the rest. Receive feedback suggesting we are over planning or telling others what to do too much. That would be an example of not being aware of the impact of your lead function on others, because as you said before, it's what you see as right. And again, I'll just go back to, I'll double down on the idea of being in the bubble of the function, where you have more information than other people, but actually less information about the effect of it in the context. It's like someone who's obsessed by something, and they don't realize how that obsession is affecting the rest of their life and other people.
Wait, I just, knowing that I have a time cap in about 30 or 40 minutes here, do you want to get into the two types here in the FI?
Yes. I'm gonna say for people, if you
abrupt TE.
Yeah. I'm just gonna say for people, like, I'm gonna say for folks, pause the screen, take that in. This is basically Dario's point of view that so example, he actually mentions, I'll go for this because he mentions ENFJ. If the highest scores for extroverted feeling with support processes, introverted, so basically it's FENX, it's lead FE with intuiting, then the bottom half is home to sensing and thinking. So according to the actual results, position 4, the modest servant, is actually strong. The actual data. Now that's just self-reporting. So according to self-reporting, this would be a better model of ENFJ, where Fi is within the club functions, and for ENTP, Ni would be in there. So that's, and then there's some things about how I see Fi. Again, people can pause that, take it in, but in a shorthand, you see it at the whole type level. Say with INFP, they will assert right and wrong, that it's coming from an internal conviction. So they're using their Fi assertively. I definitely think Fi is involved in empathy, because ESTPs and ENTPs have a problem with that. You know, imagining putting themselves into somebody else's shoes. Imaginative Fi, I think that is big time involved in characterization and putting yourself in the center of a character, because INFPs and ISFPs can be very good as novelists. And I think ethics of relations, where you're in harmony with other people and bringing other values into harmony, that is like when someone has a dilemma, balancing, having the hierarchy of a values ladder, and those things. So now we're going to get over to this. So then, Kristen, in my opinion, one of these sides is much worse at Fi than the other, but I will retain. I mean, one of them is pathologically bad, in my opinion, at Fi. I mean, this one on the left, I mean, it seems pathologically bad at Fi. Well, actually, but yeah, I mean, I'll take that back a bit. Bad at Fi.
Pathologically,
yeah, that was yeah. Last week the Fe was pathologically bad in I.L.E, and we have seen that, like like Donald Trump is pretty poor at Fi, but that's because his life has not caused him to develop. I can imagine Donald Trump with a different life experience. Life experience would have, because like he's going to be surrounded by a lot of yes people. Whereas Donald Trump, who didn't grow up the way he did, he would have encountered more pushback.
So my personal experience, when push comes to shove, when it like has to happen, of don't you understand like my perspective or another person's perspective or how they might feel, I think that ENTP or the NETX is better at that than ENFJ or the FENX.
Right. I've put that under that understanding different perspectives. I've got that under harmonizing NE in my subfunction system, which is part of the reason why ENTP finds it so hard to have a value, because they can look at an issue from so many different sides.
Got it. Okay. So for FI being more like awareness of within oneself, sorry, I actually was like, you're right, in a different thing there. Awareness of one's own.
Yeah. So
yeah.
So ENTP can understand if they think someone's argument is internally consistent, they can understand where it's coming from in terms of the premise of the person. But that's on like an intellectual level. The actual feeling of what somebody else feels. And I've seen videos with a certain ENTP, and he had other ENTPs on there saying they haven't got a clue. Well, and then even a female ENTP said this. Now, she was in her 20s, where she said that, how am I supposed to know how they're feeling unless they tell me? Like, and so they'll say these things, but I would also say FI is one of those functions that is very hard to get right, because it's so bound up with someone's mental health.
Yeah, I was just about to go get my 8 Keys book to look at how Dario defines FI.
Yeah, go on. Right, yeah, a lot of it is, I think that might have been one of my highest scores. Now, the thing is, though, Dario thinks that Americans are going to score high on FI just because of sociological reasons, because of the way it's bound up around freedom. And there is a lot of spin in that book towards gamma values. Like Dario loves his valued functions in that book. You can tell that the SE, FI, TE, and NI are his favorites. Like, I mean, he frames NI as the uber function. That's like the highest form of awareness is NI. And it's like,
okay. So yeah, this is a. So he says, I'm just going to read straight out of the book for 4 bullet points. This is not
me,
divulging
Dario.
too much.
She's her own person.
It's not, and this is not divulging. This is out of, let me say how many pages here.
200 odd pages, I suppose.
Well, right, but I mean, out of the FI description, there's exercises in here that are invaluable. I won't reveal those. But out of 15 pages of description, this is just when you develop your introverted feeling about evoking loyalty and commitment to larger issues. Now that I see ENFJ very much die hard to the point of not even realizing that they exercise that in life. I think ENTP has more of an awareness of that.
Right. So,
but then the next point, though, about making choices that harmonize with what's truly important to you, I think ENTP, now this is going to flip, I think ENTPs do a better job of actually practicing a life that's in harmony with some core values that they have, whereas ENFJ, because of that loyalty they have to others and to groups, can actually go against some of their ideals and not realize it and be very disturbed at a deep level if that's brought up.
Okay, so there's the sticking to the ideals, but what kind of ideals would the ENTP have? So I would imagine a lot of ENTPs are going to be Enneagram 7 fixated, and so their ideal is going to be, I want as many options as possible, and I want to.
Or
it's like they're the kind of
also
ideals that are like that. They're not the, so for example, an NF might be more likely to have ideals that are self-sacrificing and altruistic. So it's harder for the NF to live up to its self-image and its ideals. Whereas the ENTP7's ideals of, I find it relatively easy to do what I want to do and be interested in and stick to what I find interesting in the moment. Yeah, I'm very much into my value, because it's like, you know what I mean? Because their values are to have fun and they're going to stick to it very well. So there is that issue of the values that one has are, depending on the values, are easier to stick to than others, because the idealists tend to be idealistic and again have those values that go to their sort of like higher angels of their nature. And so you still have idealists, obviously, they still have a low side like everybody else, but their ideals are so high that it can be hard. So I'm writing a character at the moment called Laura, and part of her issue and why she's so complicated is that her trying to be congruent with her values. And the values of a lot of idealists can be, the name is in the clue is in the name of the temperament, too idealistic, too quixotic, you know, like Don Quixote, whereas other values are more easily attained. So now the benefit of that for the idealist is that they've got a high ideal to grow towards, and maybe other types have got ideals that are not necessarily good for their personal growth. So for instance, if your ideal is, so an idealist might say, so your ideal is just to be self-centered, and so they might say to the EPs, so your ideal is to have fun and be self-centered. And that is where you got an issue with ENFP, because ENFP has got that from their EP and they've got NF. So I see ENFPs as really conflicted between two poles within them, and they have another pole as well of confliction, which is acceptance and approval, with them having an EF preference and being authentic. And so they have that pull that tension
Yes.
within them, and they have that tension between the EP part, which is like having fun experiences, and then especially if there's an idealistic NF part, and so a lot of their actions can be, well, you say this and you do that, yeah, but that's because when I'm doing this, it's fun, and it's like from the outside, and so they do have these tensions, ENFP. But it depends if the ideals are idealists, and I think Tamsi has talked about how idealists, although she didn't use the term idealist, but she's probably talking, her audience is mainly going to be idealist, that it's having ideals for a flawed human soul, and not to have an ideal that's too high and to someone to beat themselves up because they're not like this purely altruistic person. And she's done this video series on where, yes, you can run a business and go for a profit. It's not bad to have a profit. And because she's saying that people were feeling bad to actually think about, I mean, so she had this series called Money Tantrika. And it's like getting that in the right way of, and she would say that certain people, where they might be counseling people for free. And she was saying, no, it's right. You should charge people. You shouldn't be ashamed to charge people for the service that you offer. Whereas, and I think idealists can have a feeling of, well, I should do this for the money should not be a concern. And they might feel that the money is corrupting it. But it's, again, it's learning not to be too quixotic, not to, whereas at the other end of the scale, STPs are going to go with, well, go with what works. Is that like with Richard Bandler, who I think is ESTP, it's like, for him, it's like, is that belief useful? It's like a useful, that's to him. If it's not useful, why do you hold the belief? Because like, he's not got any feeling associated with it. It's like, why would you have that belief? How's that belief helping you? Because like to him, it would be mystified. He's mystified by anybody holding a belief that's not useful, because to him, it's going through that filter of utility. So you can see there, like sticking to a value. Well, it depends what the value is, because and your values are related to your self-image, and that's a big thing with idealists, is achieving their self-image and having the right kind of self-image. And that's where maturity comes in, I think. I think there's something in there, but I've waffled around, but there might be a nugget in there that might be useful to somebody.
Just waffling around in any.
Obviously, there's a little kernel in there that might be useful.
A few kernels strung together.
Yeah, so this idea of like the way Victor is thinking with this, FI plus, and the way he's defined FI plus, I'll just get over here. So Victor's very deductive with model G. So like he defines his so he has these charges which are like the two versions of a function, and he bases it on the type that has that function as its lead. Now the reason why he's got FI plus is that there's a reigning dichotomy called positivist negativist, and so the E.I.E, the thin or FINX as I call it, in SOCIONICS, that is a positivist. And so Victor says, okay, I'm saying that the FINX leads with FI plus R, FI plus. And he's going to say that ESI leads with FI minus. Now, the issue is that when he then plugs that in to all of the boxes, everyone that's got FI plus in that box, it's like, this is their little bit of INFP. And so it's like, tries to be equally friendly with everyone. And so there is a little bit of that, because it's like, now I do like the fact that he put empathetic in there. This is the function that shapes modest and empathetic behavior, when I would say the person is mentally healthy.
I like that he said that shapes too. It doesn't.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good point. Yes.
That's however this was translated or worded. That's done well.
Yeah. Shapes. So, so let's interpret this. Finds it hard to guess who to be wary of and who deserves to be trusted, and what is the appropriate distance. So this goes to my idea of it's also within socionics as well, that the break function, the polar function, place of least resistance, tends to be binary, where this is like the opposite of the differentiation, where I would say the default function is most differentiated. So even a famous socionics person whose name I'll just mention his name. I'll just say Jack. And so this person called Jack, socionics people out there will know who he is. And I agree with him when he said that E.I.E, F-I-N-X will know how they feel about everyone and everything, and be able to place somebody on a spectrum of like from acquaintance to like
That's
BFF.
NIFX.
No, that's E.I.E is F-I-N-X. So the F-I DOM in socionics.
Okay.
Right. So it's, again, socionics can be very narrow, and I do say that to me, F.I. harmonizing is about judging the level of interpersonal distance based on how you personally feel about the person. Now, I would also say that relationships can be moderated via other functions, especially F.E. Like someone can know what are the social customs for dealing with somebody. It's like when they talked on Seinfeld about what is the etiquette of dating on different dates. It's like Effie is involved there in the relations, but in terms of internally, the FI polar person can have a very hard time feeling the status of a relationship with somebody where it's binary. This person doesn't like me, this person really there's not those fine gradations. And so they're not very good at judging the status of the relationship based on their own subjective feeling about the relationship. Now, ESTP, I would imagine in this situation would be better at reading affect display than ENTP, but maybe ENTP is better at interpreting it and finding patterns and deducing from that. And I also think experience is going to come in.
Yeah, experience will always play a role.
And so that's this, tries to be equally friendly with everyone. And for when Victor writes the SOCIONICS profile, because it's FI minus, it's more like distrusts most people. Yeah, hard.
Which type is this on the left in pink?
So this is ENTP.
Yeah. Right.
And then ENFJ. And so, again, I think the theme of binary, it's like they don't know they've not got that finely tuned spectrum of, and so for example, this example.
I'd actually say that the binary thing comes from not having an openness. With the ENFJ, I think this goes back to the lead function of FE. They have a bit of an openness for the type of relationship and interaction that it might be, and they have a spectrum there.
Yeah, and I also think that from a Kersey point of view, ENFJ is an idealist, and idealists' top intellect is diplomatic enabling, and relationships is a big part of diplomatic enabling, to such an extent that Kersey thinks that diplomatic enabling are very good at working in human resources. And so, and if you think of, even Victor calls ENFJ the mentor. There's got to be some FI, and even
which is so funny that as a mentor, there's
well, you shifted to that
concept there in promoting somebody and encouraging them forward, but then you have the point over here under FI plus number 2 under purple, wary of praise. So for them to receive it themselves.
Yeah, that depends on the mental health. Like some of them are like some of the cult leaders. They like want their they don't have mixed feelings about that. Wary of praise, but also like it. Yeah, they could have mixed
I
feelings
think
about
there's a
that.
concept there in direct praise, like you are magnificent, versus regarding their word as gold. Like if you just take what they say as being
Right.
wonderful versus if you directly say, I respect you, or I think that what you have to offer the world is magnificent. There's a very different correlation between directly saying it versus just acting on it or implying it.
Yeah, and I also
I'm
think
not
that
sure if that's what that gets into, but I haven't known ENFJs to enjoy praise that much. ENTPs, I think so.
yes, because they're less. I was about to say they're less likely to get it, but it depends. But also I think that ENFJs like okay, so from an American point of view, you've probably experienced a lot of people giving sort of phony "have a nice day" kind of praise.
Yeah.
And so ENFJ would be able to read that kind of like phony kind of praise easily because, again, the way I see it, Fe is their lead function. Fe is the most differentiated function, is the function they're most conscious of. Yes, you can get in the bubble of the lead function, but I would say that ENFJ, if they see that someone genuinely praises them, they're not going to be wary of it. Now, what could happen, I would imagine, because they become such good readers of people, that they may become wary of praise if they have to initially think, oh, is this somebody else who's sycophantic, who's trying to lay the charm on me, giving me flannel? And so it might be their past experience of reading people trying to BS them,
Which is
trying to
interesting though,
trying to
because
bust them up.
they can very much do that.
Yeah,
ENFJs
yeah,
can.
yeah. They can do that as well with their when they go down the bad slope of because they are and the NFJs are the only directive feeling types, and the NTPs are the only informing thinking types.
Mm-hmm.
So that means usually feelers are informing and thinkers are directive. And so with ENFJ having that, and to a certain extent, ENFJ is not going to value the SI needs of other people because they don't value the SI needs in themselves. The needs that people, what they could do, ENFJ, is conflate that they themselves know what is better for somebody else than that other person does. Now, ESFJ can also get into that
Oh my
mindset.
gosh, you just
Yeah,
what you said about like the SI and almost like disregarding that that's important and thinking they have a broader spectrum of what really matters. I've completely experienced that with the ENFJ, that it's like you're telling me this, and this is from me having SI, like that this little thing makes or breaks. And I'm like, yeah, like I might not have exact words for why that matters so much to me, but it does, versus ENTP. And I'll expand this out to ESTP. My experience with them is like, you mean to tell me there's this one tiny speck of a thing that will make you like me? Perfect. Done. They like see that as like a bit more of like an easy street.
part of it might be is that going off your personal experience is you have a complementarity with NPs because of just the way that the complementary romance styles of whereas NJs and SJs, they're not, they're going to slightly rub each other the wrong way.
It's different, I think, with INJs because I have some INJs that I'm close with,
Right.
and
Okay.
they seem to have a respect for. Maybe it's because it's so foreign. I'm not sure. When I give like an SI thing where I'm like, this really, really matters, they're like, okay. It's not an immediate respect or light bulb thing, but it's just a little bit of a curious acceptance. That makes
Right.
sense. That's the energy that I get.
Also with INTJ, you've got that TE going on, and one of your parents, I think, is INTJ preferences.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that there's a lack of nuance with the FI in its own internal thing. And the SOCIONICS definition of FI is it's like it's only this. It's like it's only this. The harmonizing subfunction.
The harmonizing.
Yeah, it's like, now, certain times they mention ethical things. That does crop up every now and then, and it crops up in one of these. Right. Remorse is unlikely to eat on him long. As he is too busy distracted. Oh, I'm too busy distracted from my guilty conscience.
I felt so guilty until I forgot about it.
Right, so you can see there's like an internal ethical thing about right and wrong and remorse and guilt that does work its way into the profile. So I would say every now and then you get a bit of assertive in there, but it focuses, like they've even put there, ethics of relations. So with mine, I tend to broaden things out, try not to be as precise, and get and I think that. So do you agree? Or rather, I shouldn't do that. That's naughty saying. Do you agree? I was going to say, do you think that generally FI DOMs would show these various kinds of FI? That they are a thing. That I'm not sort of making it up. Like,
so FI DOMs being able to display all 4 variations of FI here,
or rather,
or exercise, not display, but exercise.
Or rather, that these 4 versions of FI are real, rather than just made up.
Okay. Okay. Assertive, I think, is FI, but I'm not sure that plays out in FI DOMs because those are the introverted types. And I'm just correlating in my mind, assertiveness is usually commonly associated with an extroverted function.
Yeah.
FI DOMs can do that in such a non-obvious way.
Yeah, maybe assert it to themselves.
True to them. I would say true to themselves.
Maybe a conviction I should maybe put for assert. Maybe I need another one.
Maybe use that word.
I gotta get that right. Now I've got to use the right word. Now I'm gonna use flipping
You're
conviction.
welcome for putting that word on your radar.
Yeah. Because I do see what you mean. Like you conjures up an image of assertively, actively asserting it. But then again, you hear FI DOMs, especially INFP, talking a lot about their values and their value charged word usage will come out, and it's like you hear like the keywords, value charged keywords will come out.
Imaginative, yes, I see and hear that in FI. I'm going to say like probably any type I've heard use that consciously or express FI consciously. There's some sentence comes out of like, can you imagine what they're going through?
Yeah. And also just in terms of what the types are good at the whole type level. Like
Yes,
Douglas
and
Adams, not good at characterization, and he was asked about it. They said, "Well, it's not about the characters, it's about the ideas." There you go, boom. That was like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Because Melvin Bragg asked him, he said Arthur Dent was a bit of a stereotype. He says, "Oh yeah, of course. It's not about the characters, it's about the ideas." There you go. ENTP with characterization, not so brilliant. But FPs,
okay, under
yeah, you're gone.
then I trailed off to continue to read under harmonizing, ethics of relations and values, harmony and balancing values, absolutely. FI DOMs, I see that. A strong dislike of their, interestingly enough, some closest friends of mine, INFP and ENFJ, so same social group, but the ENFJ can tend to prod the person to basically evoke a reaction and a strong reaction, thinking that they're going to get at what the person really thinks, and then also just get a more, what do you call it, like streamlined kind of engagement going. And the friend of mine who's INFP does not like that at all, because it stems from disharmony. And this is like decades of interactions in a social group that continues over and over again. So the FI and X that I know, and this goes for several FI DOMs, that a lack of harmony, especially intentional disharmony, they dislike very much.
Yeah, and that was something that Kersey got towards, that the informing idealists, the NFPs, FINX and NEFX, they go towards that mediating, and they are interested in harmony of relations. So that's an aspect where that lines up with socionics, that there is that aspect of FI about harmony. And I was watching a documentary on Ralph McCrory today, the artist, and they're all talking about how such a nice guy he was and how accommodating he was. And I thought, right, this guy's either like, my first choice for his type would be like ISFP, INTP second. And basically what you had was, you had a technical, so he did all the conceptual artwork for Star Wars. So basically everything in Star Wars, the original trilogy, came out of his mind, Ralph McCrory, the conceptual artist. Now, he worked for Boeing and did technical illustration. So what probably happened is, so Kersey relates designing. He thinks INTP is the best for that. So what you could have got is, you know that we talk about those activity, the super ego pairs. So you could have had an ISFP that was in a job that was almost a blend of ISFP and INTP, because you're being an artist, but it's technical illustration. So you're getting into the design of something. And so when you saw all of his artwork for Star Wars, it looks real, because like he's sort of like taking in all of those design principles. And so Ralph McCrory, it's like, could this guy be? So it's like interaction style accommodator. And like, he was like the humble genius, as someone said. So
but under assertive though, I just also just going back to that, FI DOMs do that, but they do it silently. I think by just with like against the social grain. I don't think they go against the social grain. I think they just disengage with the social grain if it isn't true to themselves.
Well, maybe I'm thinking about,
or they don't interact. They just, I don't know. I just would.
I've seen a lot of like
going against sounds like an action, like an outward action to me. And what I see more in FI DOMs is a retreating.
Yeah, like I said, being prepared to stay true to self, even if it means going against the social grain. Prepared to do that. But again, they're naturally going to be, again, using Kersey, an accommodator. Accommodators and collaborators. Accommodator. ISFP and INFP are both accommodators in Kersey. And so, so my subfunction system does try to like, just a way of organizing aspects of functions that are already out there. And so I was like, so I moved up normalizing just to main, because I couldn't really find normalizing. But getting back on track, because I know you've not got much left. So
We've got maybe 5 minutes.
5 minutes, flipping heck. Right, I'm putting the timer on. Oh no, run it. Let's do 4 minutes and then that extra minute. Right, finds it hard. Right, and this bit. Hard to give moral support, comfort others, show empathy. Yeah, well, I find that hard as well. Maybe the NTPs, they gotta learn like CBT. Like, because it's like they're rationals. It's like, well, if you think about it like this, you'll stop crying. They won't put it that bluntly. But they feel like that would be their inner dialogue. If you think about it like this, you'll stop crying. Right. Yeah, divine child attitude, wishing to be favourite without any visible effort on his side. A lot of this, like, that sounds like Boris Johnson. Like, one Russian woman said he would sell his grandmother for a witty line, for a witty remark. No, I think she was actually ESI, this woman. Watched it on a Russian TV channel.
Okay, I have to interrupt because this line number 6 is, I swear I can pick an ENTX out in a room because of this attitude and energy.
Right.
It very much stands out, and it's different from other extroverted types and their energy, but it is the, like, I don't know, like I'm something special and rare in this world. And I look over and I'm like, why? And that's, it's, and it's not that, I hate to see the end part too about without any visible effort, because I know some very hardworking NETXs.
Right.
And it's not that they don't deserve it, but they definitely carry that energy and attitude forward.
Yeah, and I think other people might see them because of they have so many irons in the fire, and they have so many like interests that it looks like they're dabbling. They're not, because they're not fully committed to one thing, but they might argue that they fit all those interests in, because all extroverts have high energy, I would say, from an introvert's point of view. Although extroverts can get depressed too. So that bit's true. That's like goes towards the rational thing of disregards the established values and traditions of the group. May feel hurt when that is brought to his attention. But remorse is unlikely to eat on him long, as he is too easily distracted. I think that's well written for comedy reasons. I'll give Victor comedy points for that. Comedy points.
Oh, yes.
Right.
I've seen that flash of series of those 3 things come across in ENTP.
Yeah. But generally it's that lack of, and again, also ethics is not really, if they can be blind to it, because to them it's on any particular issue, they can see it from so many different angles.
What?
FI blind.
Like, I know, I just meant ethics being like, for that type.
Yeah, because they can.
Like, well, how do you define ethics? What actually is ethics? Let's debate what that means.
Yeah. And they can, and in the moment, they can be part of the actually genuine in the moment, in knowing that, because to them it's almost like they don't have a dog in the hunt with a particular argument, because they don't have the feelings attached to the arguments. The arguments are detached, and they look at the arguments. They're not invested in any of the arguments. And so maybe that's part of the NE harmonizing thing. And so they can be good at devil's advocating things and looking at things from another point of view. They're not got that, again, they're not. So that is why ENTPs, and frequently they'll talk about TI being objective, because to them they're being, you could say that they're objective as in disinterest, as in not partial to a particular argument. They're about the internal consistency of an argument. I've listened, there's a guy on Partially Examined Life called Mark Linsenmeyer, and I think is ENTP, and he's talked about various ethical and moral systems, and it's like they just get to a point of view of it depends what point of view you're coming back, and it works in certain situations and doesn't work in others. And so they'll compare these different ethical systems, such as deontology, which basically boils down to do unto others as you would have others do unto you. And then that depends on who that is. If like it's an ESTP, well, I don't mind if they slap me around the back. You know what I mean? This is like what they, because it's like the ESTP. Well, I wouldn't mind it if somebody else pinched my ass. So it's like,
oh gosh, that's actually, yeah, heard that before.
Yeah.
That's
oh, you've actually heard them say that. I just made it up now.
oh yeah, in real, yeah,
Something like that. So the deontology argument, it's consistent for them, but like I'm treating others as I wish to be treated. So yeah. So like there is and so to be fair to the ENTP, in a lot of situations, it can look like okay, well, I have 1 minute to get through this. Monitors the relationships within its circle very close. So that's with the monitor thing, the hypocritical monitor, high information, wary of praise. Maybe we talked about that before. Needs to be treated nicely without nagging or abuse of any kind. Well, that's pretty much everyone. Possessive, given to anxiety, and intimate relationships may be difficult to get along with. Victor's married to an Enfj.
I actually think that's rather true, and I think it's because of number one, monitoring within its circle very closely to where that can become nitpicky without them realizing it.
Yeah, and also the ENFJ.
And then that makes them both nitpicky themselves and conversely sensitive to nitpicking. So I feel like 1, 3, and 4 are roped in there.
Also, I think ENFJ females might want, once they're in a relationship, they might want their partner to be more romantic, because like the actual romance is romanticized by the idealist, something Kersey mentioned, and so they have an ideal of what the relationship should be. We should be
and I think there's like I think there's this like ideal of what they think it should feel like, and this harmony and this fullness, which is like I think the FI of like what they expect it should be, that they should provide and that they should receive, which is very ideal. Unobtainable.
The difference between, and Kersey wrote about that, about the relationships with the mating style of idealists, and like just the realities of a relationship, not having the idealism of it. Anguish that important relationships going wrong. Yeah, I could put that under FE as well. Strong statements about right and wrong. Again, this is the idea of the hypocritical part, right? Which is why I renamed it. Victor didn't call it hypocritical, but like he called it like monitor. But it always comes up.
This is the biggest thing that has surprised me about ENFJs that I've met, is that they make the strongest statements about right and wrong in preaching that they don't necessarily practice.
Yeah, but someone might argue that's all NFs.
Yeah, okay.
Because like I said before, because if you've got these super
about
high
that ideal, this huge thing you want to obtain that's not reasonable for anybody, let alone yourself.
Yeah, and it's like they can blame the society when it's like, it's like, again, it's the thing about being quixotic. While making strong, so we've done that. Okay, we can go with this bit. Okay, I'm going to just read this bit. Vulnerable to idealizing their personal relationships, raising them to a plane which seldom can sustain the realities of human nature. There you go, Kersey, you wrote it right, with a little bit of help from Stephen Montgomery. Their longing for the ideal mate, lover, can even cause them some restlessness at times, bringing on a vague dissatisfaction with the mate they already have. So basically, Kersey and Stephen Montgomery got in there with what we were saying. Right, there we go. And so you get the idea they are describing the same type. Which is what I keep banging on about, that I believe SOCIONICS, I will use assertive, and I will say that SOCIONICS and Kersey, Behrens and Nardi are describing the same types, at least when it comes to intuitives. And I would argue very similar when it comes to the sensory extroverts. But don't compare, but you cannot translate between the sensory introverts. especially ISTJ and ISTP. It won't cross over. Right then, so Kristen has to go. Is there anything else to show on this page? But there's that and that and that. Chub's very important. Chub's very important. There's my model, model V, and that's how I see it. So to me, I see FI is here, backseat driver, and I see FI is there, the weakest function in the NTP. That's how I personally, and that's in line with Dario's data. So, but yeah. So, should I end the broadcast now, Kristen?
Yes.
Right. There you go, ESTJ.